All right, strap in, everyone, because today's deep dive is going to take us back to the 90s. Yeah, you heard right, the
I'm
1990s.
picking up what you're putting down. This isn't your average nostalgia trip, though, is it?
Definitely not. We're on a mission to uncover some seriously surprising personal growth lessons hidden within that decade. And frankly, I'm pumped. This all started with these two audio guias you sent over.
Oh, yeah, those. One's a guide to navigating our social world today, right? But the other
The
one,
other's a personal development guide for the 90s. Can you believe that?
seriously, a guide for navigating dial-up and butterfly clips? That's wild. Okay, I'm hooked already. What's the big revelation?
So both guides talk about resilience, how to build it, how to use it, the whole deal. But here's the kicker. The 90s guide suggests that era, with all its limitations, kind of forced you to develop resilience just to survive.
Okay, now that's intriguing. We tend to romanticize the 90s, simpler times, less connected.
Right, like a pre-social media utopia. But both guides hint at something else entirely. It's almost like those very disconnects, those limitations, might hold the secret to thriving in our hyper-connected world.
Hold up, you're saying those dial-up days were actually good for us? All right, I gotta hear this.
Think about it. No internet, limited media, face-to-face interaction was basically the default setting. Imagine.
Okay, I'm picturing Scrunchies and Blockbuster. But how does that translate to, like, inner strength?
Well, the 90s guide dives into some heavy stuff like bullying. It obviously existed back then, but without the anonymity of the internet, it played out much
No,
differently.
that's right. You couldn't just block someone or report a nasty comment.
That's
Things
right.
were a lot more direct, weren't they?
Exactly. The 90s guide suggests that kids almost had to develop social fluency because bullying often meant direct confrontation.
You had to look someone in the eye and figure it out.
Yeah.
No escaping into the digital world.
Right. Imagine having to negotiate a truce with your tormentor in person.
Wow, that takes guts. No wonder people talk about the resilience of kids who grew up in the 90s. It was trial by fire. I'm starting to see what you mean. Those limitations forced a different kind of growth.
Exactly. And this idea of resilience through real-world interaction wasn't limited to just bullying. Think about social comparison, a huge issue today.
Oh, tell me about it. It's impossible to escape those perfectly curated lives on Instagram. It makes you feel totally inadequate.
Right. But in the 90s, your world was primarily your local community. You weren't bombarded with images of perfect lives from across the globe.
It was your classmates, your neighbors, your local sports team.
Exactly. The 90s guide suggests that identity back then was less about consuming trends and more about contributing to your community. Think about it. You were defined by what you brought to the group, not just what you bought.
That's a really interesting point. So instead of chasing likes online, you were building real-world connections, proving your worth through actions, not just appearances.
Right. And this likely fostered a deeper sense of self-worth that wasn't solely dependent on external validation. You were valued for who you were, not just what you posted online. It really makes you wonder, did those limitations actually help shape a stronger sense of self? We're constantly told to find our passion, to chase these huge dreams. Which is awesome, don't get me
All
wrong.
right, shoot for the stars. But the 90s seemed to have a different approach altogether.
Totally. The 90s guide emphasizes those local support networks, like those everyday interactions with neighbors, people you went to school with, your teammates. Those were the relationships that really shaped how you saw the world, right?
It wasn't about impressing thousands of followers online. It was about earning the respect of your community, your people.
And it's interesting how that ties into another point from the 90s guide, boredom.
Boredom. Wait, are you saying those endless summer afternoons with nothing but a dusty board game to your name were actually a good thing?
Hear me out. It's easy to look back with a groan and be like, ugh, there was nothing to do. But what if, and this is going to sound crazy, what if that so-called boredom was actually a hidden advantage?
Go on. You're pulling me in.
The 90s guide hints that it wasn't just boredom. It was like prime time for introspection. No smartphones, no endless scrolling, no notifications constantly pulling you in a million directions.
You actually had space to think, to process your emotions, to really dive deep into your own head.
It almost feels counterintuitive, right? Like those more limited experiences might have actually paved the way for a more, a more profound kind of self-discovery.
So we traded introspection for TikTok dances and endless memes. Man, maybe we did lose something along the way.
But before we ditch our smartphones and hunt down our old cassette tapes, our modern audio gear reminds us that the digital age does come with its own set of advantages.
Totally. I mean, the connections, the learning opportunities, the sheer volume of information at our fingertips, it's incredible.
Mhm.
It's about finding that sweet spot, that balance.
Exactly. And this new guide doesn't shy away from the challenges either. It goes
Yeah.
deep on the constant pressure to be on, the FOMO, the feeling of being overwhelmed by, well, everything.
It's a lot, let's be honest.
It really is. But here's what I find fascinating. Both guides, the 90s and the modern one, highlight the importance of self-awareness as a key ingredient for personal growth.
Right. Like, that's the foundation no matter what decade you're living in.
Okay, so we need to understand our values, our strengths, our weaknesses. Got it. But it's not enough to just know these things, right? What did the guide say about actually using self-awareness out there in the world, in the social media sphere? How do we apply it?
Both point to the importance of communication as the key. The 90s might have been all about face-to-face, but the modern guide stresses that effective communication is even more crucial now in the digital age.
It's like the playing field's changed, but the rules of the game are surprisingly similar.
Nailed it. Learning to say what you think and feel clearly, really listening to understand different points of view, setting healthy boundaries, those are skills that never go out of style. And they help you build real connections no matter what platform you're on.
So it's like self-awareness is the bedrock,
Right.
right? And communication, that's how we build it all up.
Exactly.
But how do we take these like very 90s inspired insights and make them, I don't know, make them work in our very not 90s lives?
It's a head scratcher for sure.
Like we need a 90s wisdom starter pack, but you know, updated for the 21st century and all.
Okay, I love that idea. And while I can't exactly offer a fanny pack full of wisdom,
That'd be amazing.
right? But the first thing we got to pack in there, got to be real world connection, no question. The 90s guide really hammers that home.
Yeah.
Genuine community, it's not built through likes and shares. You know, it's about showing up for each other in person, having those shared experiences, just being present.
So put down the phone, step away from the screen, go actually talk to another human being.
Radical, right?
It sounds so simple.
Right. It's like we've
Well-
forgotten how good it feels to just be with people, no other agenda.
And it's not just like hanging out, is it? There's got to be more to it than that.
You're spot on. The 90s guide makes a point about those real-life connections, how they provided this kind of built-in safety net, a sense of belonging that you really need when things get tough. And that's something we still crave today, even if we don't realize it. It just takes a bit more effort to cultivate now. You know what I mean?
So like consciously choosing to nurture those relationships instead of like mindlessly scrolling, we join that pottery class, we volunteer at that community garden down the street, we become regulars at that indie coffee shop we love.
Yes. All of that. We got to rediscover those shared spaces, those real interactions that remind us we're part of something bigger.
Yeah.
And here's the cool part. When we put in that effort, not only do we feel more connected, but we make our community stronger too. Win-win.
Absolutely. Okay, so we've got all this awesome 90s wisdom, but the truth is we can't just like rewind the clock. We live in a digital world, for better or for worse.
That's the reality.
So how do we find that balance? What's our modern audio guia have to say about that?
It encourages us to be a little skeptical, you know. Not about all technology, of course, but about how it affects us, how we think and feel. It's about taking back control, being more mindful of our time and attention, putting our well-being first.
Creating those tech-free zones, making time for face-to-face conversations, even scheduling in some good old-fashioned boredom and introspection.
I love that. It's about making conscious choices, ones that really align with our values.
Choices that help us grow. Man, who knew we'd find such wisdom by taking a trip back to the 90s? It's like we dug up a treasure chest or something.
I'd say so.
Yeah.
Both of these guides, each in their own way, remind us that personal growth, it's not about reaching some perfect airbrush version of ourselves. It's about the journey, you know, discovering who we are, learning as we go, embracing the messiness.
I love that. And sometimes those most profound insights, they come from the most unexpected places. Like, say, a deep dive into the 90s. But before we sign off for today, I want to leave everyone with one last thought. We've talked a lot about the power of real-world connections, right? So here's a little challenge for you. Think about your online world, your digital circles. Do those relationships give you that same sense of genuine support, that feeling of belonging that you get offline? What might be missing? And how can you bridge that gap? Keep those questions in mind, and until next time, keep exploring, keep connecting, and keep those brains buzzing.